with respect to a marriage, when a couple separate, the separation itself doesn't revoke documents they might have in place around, a will and an enduring power of attorney. It's the point of divorce that would revoke those documents. It's very important that from a time of separation that people get advice around, updating their will and an enduring power of attorney so that their ex-spouse, your decision-making roles, and is also not receiving their estate.
Welcome to Divorce Down Under, the Aussie way, where a regular guy like me, Matt, will help you navigate a fresh start following a divorce. After experiencing a divorce and going through all sorts of emotions, I hope to bring you the right tools and advice so you can set up a better life after divorce. Hear from experts and people like you who have lived it, sharing insights so you may find peace in a new beginning. Hi everyone, welcome to Divorce Down Under. Another episode coming from, I'm on the sunny coast and my guest is in Brisbane. Before we wanted to get away, obviously there's some disclaimers about general advice. We want to remind everyone that, the viewers that this the show offers general advice only. It doesn't consider your personal situation. It's not intended to be relied upon, and any financial or legal decisions should only occur after you have received tailored advice from a legal or financial professional like Kelly, who we have on today. Let's get into it. And I'd like to welcome you, Kelly, from Nurture Law to Divorce Down Under.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. A super busy time of the year for you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time and your insights into what we're going to talk about, some wills and estates. And I guess before we get underway, I always like to get you to introduce yourself to the viewers and tell us a little about something that we don't know.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm Kelly from, I have my own wills and estate law practice in sunny Queensland in Brisbane called Nurture Law, which I founded about 3.5 years ago now. So we're a boutique practice and we only specialise in wills and estates, so estate planning, estate administration and estate disputes. And so it's an interesting topic to talk about. I think it ties in with, family law. It's a good point in time where things need to be reviewed. So we'll get stuck into that. Something that people don't know about me. I thought I'd come with a funny one. Matt did pre-warn me, but I guess a funny one would be when I was a teenager, I was roped into being in a beauty pageant. It's not really something I do, but I was roped into it for a local rugby league club where my family played. So I didn't win, but I got to go on the float at the football grand final. So it was a bit of a laugh.
I like it. I would never have picked that. So you got me there.
I've got the sash to prove it.
Thank you for sharing that.
That's okay.
One thing I haven't shared, I also like to do the same. I've shared a few different things of myself over the time. I love to windsurf. I haven't done it for probably a year or so. I've been focusing on this business, but I've been doing it since the age of 15. So
really?
Windsurfed in places like Maui and overseas and all sorts of different destinations. So windsurfing is my little favourite hobby.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I don't think I'd be athletic enough, but that sounds fun.
It keeps you sane because you're out in the water on your own and nothing else to worry about. You're just sailing around and you can just let everything go, and it's nice to be outside.
Well, maybe hopefully over the Christmas break you'll have some time.
Yeah, definitely, and it's always a good time of the year. Okay, let's jump into it. Kelly, because I know you got some really good ideas and some understanding of how wills and estates planning can work. Because let's face it, it can be complex from a law perspective. But we'd like to talk about today. We'll explore wills and estates planning during, I guess, a divorce or a separation, or really in any circumstances. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we'll sort of talk about things, whether there are any differences between de facto, divorce, separation, and how these can potentially impact your outcomes. Because I know you've got so many different stories of good and bad. We talked offline, and I'd really love for you to be able to share those with the audience. And being the principal lawyer and director of Nurture Law, I really like what you're doing because you're bringing a fresh approach with your upfront fixed pricing, and that's giving, especially in this day and age with with cost of living and everything else going through the roofs, that's giving them the peace of mind and confidence when they want to seek legal support. Because I think it's really, people don't realize this with regards to a lawyer. Sort of prior to getting a lawyer, you question whether you want one, but I think by the fact that you're questioning that you want a lawyer, I think it's really important that you actually invest in that initial lawyer and just get their advice, and then you can make a more of an informed decision. Yeah, what
Yes,
would you
most
say to that,
definitely.
actually, Kel?
I think that, fixed pricing, it gives that transparency and it takes away perhaps a hurdle or a mind block that people might have around engaging a lawyer, and they know this is the fixed pricing. We're not going to be charged, in 6-minute increments on an hourly rate. And they know from the outset, so particularly with estate planning and wills, it's often seen as a life admin task that people don't get around to doing. So if we can take away some of those hurdles and have that upfront pricing, I think is a good idea. And we have different packages for different requirements of people who have different circumstances, and I'm fairly transparent about that. All of my fixed pricing is on my website, and I think more solicitors should do that. I think it's definitely a different way, but I've had nothing but really good feedback around that. So if we can help people, get these documents in place to avoid what can often be a mess for your loved ones to have to deal with, that's great. If we can get people engaging lawyers and perhaps not trying to DIY these things as well. Mm.
I agree, and I think I was there, having gone through a separation or that many years ago, and you always question it. But I've now learnt it's very smart to actually approach a lawyer, even if you're not sure, and get that better understanding, and then you can actually make a much more informed decision because you're talking to someone like yourself about wills and estates. And let's face it, I have no experience in that area, and no doubt you're going to set a strategy in place to navigate those sorts of circumstances. So yeah, I really I recommend someone, at least getting someone like you on board and try and explaining whatever it is the situation are in. Let's I'm gonna knowing the fact that you've got I appreciate your time today. Let's dive straight in. So can you maybe talk about the basics of wills and estates
Mm-hmm.
and how they may apply to divorce, separation, marriage, whatever it be, to the circumstances, sort of broadly speaking?
hmm So I should just from the outset mention that I'm a Queensland practitioner, so I will talk more around our laws with respect to succession law, which is the wills and estates, that we have state-based legislation in Australia. So, but I will more so speak about Queensland. So it's so important for people to get advice from practitioners within their jurisdiction around these things. But yeah, so I'll talk generally where I can. Uh,
Good point.
so with regards to estate planning, it's, I guess, an umbrella sort of term, which it's not just a will. So it would include uh, a will, but also doing things like enduring powers of attorney, health directives, looking at superannuation nominations, looking at wishes around things like funeral arrangements and burial and cremation, looking at other succession mechanisms for things like if people have business entities or family trusts. So it's looking at that as a whole. It's a comprehensive estate plan and not just a will. Yeah, so that's what estate planning covers, and they're all things that need to be considered when things like separation occurs, or a divorce, or marriage, entering into new relationships. There's certainly key points where these documents need to be reviewed for various reasons, which I'll go into. So, sorry, Matt.
No, no, you go. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people would probably be surprised to learn that with respect to a marriage, when a couple separate, if they're married, that the separation itself doesn't revoke documents they might have in place around, a will and an enduring power of attorney. It's the point of divorce that would revoke those documents. So it's very important that from a time of separation that people get advice around, updating their will and an enduring power of attorney so that their ex-spouse is not in those decision-making roles and is also not receiving their estate. And separately to that, it's looking at things like, do we need to update superannuation nominations? So a lot of people might put in place nominations as to who is to receive their superannuation if they pass away. It's important to look at reviewing them, looking at how you own property. So if you own your home, for example, with your spouse who you've separated from, um, as joint tenants, if you were to pass away, it would automatically pass to them by survivorship. So it's important to get advice about whether you change that tenancy of the property, before things like a property settlement is agreed upon, because sometimes it can take a while for those things to occur, for a property settlement to be finalised. So it's very important from the outset to get that advice so that your wishes are followed through, and your estate goes to those who you want. It's also important that if things like divorce, it does revoke those documents to a certain extent. So it's getting advice about that and what that means if you don't have a will or an enduring power of attorney in place. So if there is no will, our government provides us with one essentially by way of intestacy legislation, which actually sets out who receives your estate when you die without a will, and that may not be who you actually want to receive your assets. It also means that if you don't have an enduring power of attorney and someone needs to be making decisions for you while you're alive, if you've lost capacity, if you don't have that document in place, your loved ones might have to go off to a tribunal to be appointed as an administrator and guardian for you, and that's not an easy process. So it's very important to make sure those documents are in place so that you're not leaving a mess for other people to deal with, and that your wishes are adhered to.
Yeah. No, they're really good points, and they're good examples of some of the things I still forget about and aren't aware of. And in what you just discussed there, I mean, you talked about the laws being different, and I know that they're very different in Perth, especially from a family law perspective. They're completely different over there. So it's really important that you mentioned that. You talked about briefly about the updating your super and getting nominations, whether or not they need to be reviewed. How you own your property, whether it's married. I think that's some really good points. Whether or not you need to change the settlement, and divorce. Obviously, you talked about the differences there, and then you mentioned how the government sets out who receives what, and you may need to visit the tribunal, which is probably not a place you want to be.
No, definitely not. It's yes, it's definitely. I mean, it's key, I think, for people to also following a marriage breakdown, a person might repartner. So it is also important to get specialised estate planning advice, particularly if there's a blended family situation, because there are certain people who can make claims on your estate. So it's getting advice about how to limit the risk of that happening, and structuring things to provide for everyone as best you can in your will, and around who's going to be in the decision making roles for you if you're unable to. So it's important to think about that too if someone is repartnering.
Yeah, agree. And let's face it, these days, properties are worth so. From an asset perspective, properties are worth so much these days. It's such a critical and important aspect of someone's investment, their future at least. So, yeah, I couldn't agree
Yeah.
more. Yeah. Can you talk about any common misconceptions that people may have around wills?
Yeah, I think often people think that they could go and get a will kit from the post office, and that's sufficient. Now, I'm not saying those documents, if they're completed, aren't necessarily legitimate, if they're completed uh, in accordance with our formal requirements. However, they're often usually full of mistakes. So people may inadvertently, record things that just don't make sense in the documents. Like I've seen, for example, people might say, "Oh, I leave my estate to my family in Germany," for example, but it's going, well, who are they? And not actually realizing that that's unclear, it's ambiguous. And when those things happen, we have to then, when the person passes away, we have to then go off to court to get the court to make a decision about that, and that can be really expensive. So it's seeing a professional and spending money on that while you're alive will save your estate potentially from incurring lots of way more legal fees upon your death. So it's seeing a professional. Will kits aren't necessarily the best thing to do. I definitely steer clear of them. Yeah, some other misconceptions would be, a lot of people think, oh, if I leave them $1 in my will, they can't contest it. They can't make any claim on my estate. That's not true. People in every jurisdiction in our country, various people can make claims on your estate. It's about there's needs-based claims, and it's about whether they've been adequately provided for in your will based on things like the size of your estate and various other factors. So that is definitely a misconception that I hear a lot. And I think people also, there's some misconceptions around, if you don't have a will, people often think, oh, my spouse will just receive it, or, my children will just receive it. But that's not true. Our laws are very different in every jurisdiction about who receives your estate if you die without a will. So it's important to know that and make those decisions yourself. So there's some misconceptions. Yeah.
No, good point. And you kind of touched on a few of these, but it's always good to be aware of why we don't do things for some reasons, when in fact we should be making those decisions. For example, can you tell us why you think so many people put off, well, not so many people, but why people put off, this kind of planning? And, there's obviously some inherent risks there, that potential risks. Can you talk more to that?
So I think a lot of people put it off because nobody likes to talk about death or, incapacity and ill health. They're subjects that people just don't like to discuss. And I think perhaps it's also people not being aware of the consequences of not
Yeah.
having those documents
Yeah, I
in
agree.
place.
And I think also, would you say also, some people are in situations, we talked briefly off air about this, around having are they asset rich and cash poor? Could that be one of the reasons, or no,
Yeah.
generally not the case?
That can certainly be the case, and I think it's around accessing lawyers and being able to afford that. There's definitely that factor, but I think that it is something that is so important that people should be saving up to do. It's such, you talked on it briefly before, property values, although people might, be cash poor, the value of their property might be, huge. So they say we'll have the biggest wealth transfer in the next decade or so in our country. So it's just so important and I think it should be a priority for everyone, no matter what age they are. People don't realize that, young people often think that, oh, it doesn't matter, I don't have a whole lot. But, you've got to think about superannuation. You might have life insurance within that is quite large. So it's certainly, it doesn't matter if you're over 18. I think that everyone should have a will and an enduring power of attorney so that people can make decisions if you're unable to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really important. It's really important to strategize, whether or not you're in a position, like you said, you're a younger person with not a lot, but I think you're setting yourself up for success. Kind of off topic, but I've got myself a vision board with my own values and all that sort of thing. Like I have my own values, my own vision board. That's at the very start, and I kind of see that as a similar thing. Like it's an investment; it's not an expense into getting advice from someone like yourself. Do you see it that way?
Oh, 100%. And I think, people pay for insurance, for example. Think of it that way. It's like an
Mhm.
insurance policy. It's just something that you do and you've got to do, and you pay for insurance to protect your assets while you're alive. Why wouldn't you make sure that they are protected on death? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
Unfortunately,
enjoy. Sorry, go.
sorry. Unfortunately, I do a lot of litigation work, and I see the amount of legal fees that are incurred by multiple parties within an estate that can diminish the estate significantly. So if that can be avoided,
Mm.
that's a tick. Mm.
And I think they're incorrectly set up, which makes it all the more confusing and complex and technical, whatever you want to say. Which I would think would be a lot more work on your behalf. Whereas if you'd thought about it prior to, you're hopefully not going to get there. And let's face it, these days, with regards to separation, divorce, and marriage, we're pushing 50%. So 50% in 2022, 23, close to 50% of people were divorced. So that's a high proportion of people that are going to find themselves in a position of needing to figure out their wills and estates and planning. So if you can get to that beforehand and invest in someone like yourself, I think you're setting yourself up very smartly.
Oh, definitely. And I think, unfortunately, I've acted for clients where they've been in the middle of a property settlement and the other party has passed away, and there can be different legal effects depending on what stage they're at with that property settlement. But it's not nice, and you're then having to deal with other family members, and it can cause, not only financial strain for everyone, but also can have an effect on other people's relationships. So it's so important to set that up from I think it should be. I think a lot of family lawyers should, and I hope they do, encourage their clients, from that initial consultation they have, you need to go and update your documents, see an estate planning lawyer. More and more family lawyers should be encouraging that.
Yeah, it's a smart move, isn't it? It just makes that potential split an easier one to manage. And even if you're not split or
Mm.
married, it's even the same. It's still very smart to do that anyway. But
Mm.
can I so for example, when planning for your estate, are the outcomes going to be different whether you're married, de facto, divorced, separated? There's a lot of people that are together these days and not necessarily married. So in effect, they're becoming separated. But do these have different outcomes?
Yeah, so they do in terms of, people's entitlements. If you don't have a will, they have effects on whether wills are revoked or not, or other documents are revoked. Um, so to be a de facto for the purpose in Queensland, for the purpose of, say, being entitled to someone's estate under intestacy, you have to have been together for a continuous period of 2 years at the time that person died. So there's definitely, and each state has differences around that. So it's so important to get advice, you know, around that within your jurisdiction. But they do have various effects. So the ending of a de facto relationship can revoke a will to the point of where that person has received a gift or they've been appointed as an executor. But as I said, separation of a marriage does not. It's the divorce of that has that revoking effect. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of differences. So it's so important to get some specialized advice about your own situation.
Yeah, because it is. We're all got different lives, don't we, these days?
Yeah, yes, and more and more
um,
people are in de facto relationships. People aren't getting married. It's definitely more common. So it's just as important when you're in a de facto relationship to make sure you're getting that advice.
yeah, and I think the people that are remarrying or something, they're actually now getting advice from people like you because they realise how important it is. So it
Yeah,
just goes
yeah.
to show.
And there's often strategies, when people are repartnering that we can look at, around trying to protect your inheritance for your own bloodline, if you want to call it that. If you there are certain strategies that we come up with to try and do that. So it's important, and we have to look at someone's circumstances as a whole, but we certainly give advice on those things all the time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Can you give any examples of sort of best case and worst case scenarios? We all want to be in the best case scenario, not the worst case. But with regards to sort of estate planning,
I guess the best case is obviously make sure you go and see a estate planning lawyer who specialises in wills and estates, is preferable, and have all the documents in place: your will, enduring power of attorney, health directives. Look at whether or not you might want a testamentary trust in your will. There are So that's sort of the best case scenario, is having all of those documents in place. The worst case scenario is when people don't have these documents and they kind of go, oh, well, I'll be dead. It doesn't matter. They can deal with it. That is, worst case scenario. Or they've tried to DIY things and they've made it even worse. But yeah, and certainly not updating these documents. There's no set time frame when these documents need to be updated in your life. It's more around when there are changes to circumstances, as we've touched on around, separation, divorce, repartnering, having children. Like there are, situations where you really need to be updating those documents. So yeah, worst case is just not having them in place.
Yeah. And I think the best piece of advice, and you can talk to this more for me, really, having gone through a separation and all that, it would be just to get that advice, moving forward. If that was one piece of advice I was going to give anyone, and you don't have to go back in if you don't want to, but I think just getting clarity and a strategy with someone like yourself is going to put you in a much stronger position, and you're going to arm yourself with that knowledge and that extra skill to make a better decision, if that means moving forward, working more with someone like yourself or not.
Definitely. And I think, oftentimes, Googling things is not the best. I
Agree.
think I say to clients all the time, if you had a heart condition, you'd go off and see a specialist, a cardiologist, for example. So, you should do that when you're looking at, something as significant as when you're separating, seeing a specialist family lawyer. When you are having your estate planning updated, seeing an estate planning lawyer. It's really important.
Yeah, and having more of that investment mindset. It's not as much as it's an expense, but it's an important investment in the current, in the future of you're managing your estate planning to the best of your ability.
Agree.
I think we've talked enough, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I think for anyone that wants to get in contact with Kelly, she's based in Brisbane. It's nurturelaw.com.au. And yeah, I advise to reach out to Kelly if they're not sure about anything to estate planning, and to see where that takes you. But Kelly, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can get you on again.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kelly. It's been great. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Divorce Down Under, the Aussie Way, helping you navigate a fresh start after divorce. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave a review from wherever you are watching or listening, and don't forget to share this with your friends. Also, let us know what you want to hear in future episodes. See you next time for a new episode of Divorce Down Under.